That's the idea.
That's the idea. So you can gather your thoughts, ask some, we have time for questions, comments, and insights. Emily, Kate, and Joe, we have a Crackerjack staff at the Hank Center. We didn't mention this, did we? Lucy, Bill's daughter Lucy, worked for the Hank Center under our founding director, Mike Shook.
Lydia also.
And Lydia as well.
Well,
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful connection, and it really means a lot to us. A lot of things to think about with this talk, so no pressure, but let things gestate. We'd love to hear from you. And if you have a thought, just raise your hand. Joe's back there with a microphone, and feel free to comment or ask a question.
I hope I could make a coherent question. First of all, thanks for all this, Bill, and for your friendship over the years with Bill and Dan and your amazing ministry in Detroit. I want to pick your brain a little bit around results, because in your opening remarks you mentioned Merton's letter, you mentioned Forrest, and that we don't depend on the hope of results.
Right.
And, as someone who did amazing ministry all those years in Detroit and engaged in all sorts of local struggles there, yesterday I reread Bonhoeffer's conspiratorial letter after 10 years. And he's got a section there on success in which he essentially says that success is not a morally neutral thing, that the next generation depends on it. And the pressure on the conspirators to try to end the Nazi regime by a lot of moral confusion, all that too. And I'd just like you to respond to that kind of tension.
Yeah, that's such a good and important question. One that gets, I must say, way too bifurcated in I think in our communities, as though it were a choice between faithfulness and effectiveness. That's often the way that it's framed, and I think that's a little bit of a red herring. I think really quickly on this matter of Gandhi, who commended to the Satyagrahi, the truth warriors, which were very organized and disciplined and had clear goals, right? He commended to them, I forget the Hindi word, but it was basically non-attachment to results, right? And it's somewhat related to the freedom of the resurrection, I think, this kind of freedom to be able to give yourself fully, risk fully, without constraint and without anxiety about the consequences of that. So, in fact, to do that ultimately as an act of worship, as a gift to God, a gift to the community, a gift to creation, right? All of that. That's what turns out to be the most effective thing of all. If you have people with that kind of freedom acting together, Gandhi can kick the British out of India, right? So success is not idolized in that case, but neither is it forsworn. But there's a kind of freedom to act fully and freely in a way that can produce results without being attached to them. I know that may be a little too zen, but that's the way I come at that. So I think about things that we do in Detroit. You and I have had this conversation a little bit, even publicly, about organizing, which one way of organizing which can say pick a winnable struggle, build on winnable struggles, that whole process, versus can you throw yourself into a struggle that you don't know if it's winnable, if it's a risk, maybe it's a losing cause and it's still worth throwing in on, you know. So that organizing, I think, needs to have the freedom, and I know you do think that as well, to be able to act in that way. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. You want to follow up at all, or any additional thoughts?
You think a lot about this, so
Well,
you should have some things to say.
In terms of, I think that organizing is stuck on this, and it's sort of a Tupperware approach in terms of, you know, these certain mantras of winnable issues and all that stuff. And I think in the history of Mike, an organization I'm involved in Milwaukee, I think one of the better days we had actually was before the outbreak of the Iraq War, when we blocked the entrance to the federal building and painted an angel on the sidewalk there, which we had done for years where there had been a homicide in Milwaukee, trying to connect the slaughter overseas with what was happening in the city. You know, we weren't insane enough to think it was going to have any success, right? But it felt right, and it strengthened us in terms of relationships and a sense of freedom. Well, that's a rare experience.
Right.
Unfortunately.
I think of one more. I'll tell a quick story, and actually goes back to the Merton retreat. I know that Franz Jägerstätter's name was raised there. Gordon Zahn's book about Jägerstätter, if you know that, he was an Austrian peasant, Roman Catholic, who was drafted after the Anschluss into Hitler's army, and he refused to go. And he was under a lot of pressure from members of the community, his family, his priest. You know, it's like, you got to cooperate. It's pointless. Resistance is futile, kind of thing. And he said no. He wrote some letters that are a real testament that were uncovered by Gordon Zahn. And he was executed, I believe hanged. And then Gordon Zahn stumbles on these letters, publishes them in a little book called In Solitary Witness, right? And who should stumble on that book but Daniel Ellsberg, Robert Ellsberg's father, or the other way around, however you know that. And Daniel was at the time working at the Rand Corporation, and he's had these information about what was actually going on in the war, and trying to decide whether to give it to the New York Times. And he read In Solitary Witness, and it kind of nudged him over the edge, and he decided to publish the Pentagon Papers, which is one of the huge things that had an impact on the history of the war and its ending. So here's an obscure peasant executed in nowhere, whose life ends up, you know, without hope other than deep mystical, right? Ends up helping stop, you know, a war. Yeah.
It's amazing. It really is an event to think about it that way. That's just not an occurrence. That's something that's.
What's that?
It's an event that happened. It's a providential event. It's not some random occurrence. It really touches me. I wonder if any of our younger students would like to talk about the notion of liturgical nonviolence, which is fascinating. I think that's what we're talking about a little bit here. Or imagine, how to put this, I don't want to have to call you out, young people, students, ramblers, but I do want to invite you to think about your own time and think about these concepts. So if you don't have a thought, maybe that can stir something in you. And if anybody else has a thought, we'd love to hear it. Over here, please, John.
Well, not a young student anymore, but young enough to feel like this question is pertinent. Thank you for your talk, first of all. I found your work illuminating personally, but also professionally with my master's thesis and other things that I've written. What do you see the place of Catholic theology and ethics for young Catholics as they find ways to respond to political turmoil around them? I know it's been a topic I've seen of conversation in different magazines, different online spheres, which I can only imagine Dan and Bill in an online world today. But I wasn't sure what your thoughts would be of helping young Catholics especially recognize that their faith has so much to enrich their politics and enrich how they interact with the world.
Yeah, really good, important question. And I'm addressing it as a Protestant, edified. I'm United Methodist pastor, right? Even if I've ended up serving an Episcopal congregation, kind of sneaking toward Catholicism. But it's so edified in my own life and history by the Catholic tradition, and particularly, I would say, I'd say where I would encourage young people to be looking is in the sacramentalization of ethics, or which has to do with certainly recognizing. I was going to say recognizing the divine, but in a certain sense, it's recognizing the fully human in moments, ethical moments where we're being called out, right? Where things light up. And I think, as I tried to suggest with Dan and Phil in particular, I think the actions that they undertook had that sacramental character. You know, they were, you could say sacramental, you could say incarnational. They embodied, they filled history with light, right? And the Word, and embodied it. How to make that present and work for young Catholics, which is really the core of your question. My guess is that it has to do with tending relationships, you know, tending friendships, intergenerational ones, right? Young Catholics recognizing elders, elders recognizing the wisdom of an imagination of young people. I don't know. That to me, that's the location for what needs to happen. I kind of wonder if you actually have more to say on it yourself.
I mean, I know in my work with, I did my master's thesis on Dorothy Day and her applicability for young Christians today, and I think the part of living more fully and recognizing the full humanity is what I termed as her recognition of the mystical body of Christ, as her importance for activism. I approach the question as someone who sees a lot of younger Catholics drawn more to pre-Vatican II relics of the church, and both their liturgical preference, but also how they understand the world. And so I find it an interesting tension of trying to help younger Catholics realize that the church just isn't one straight line is how it's been presented to them, that there is a breadth of tradition and a breadth of the importance of social ethics.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still working it out myself, but that's why I thought I would ask you.
Thank you for working on it.
Those are packed questions, Anthony. I really appreciate that. Anybody want to pick up that thread? Anybody feel that they want to respond to what Anthony has just articulated? Is there a tension between the kind of pre-modernist vein in the church versus kind of the post-Vatican II, post-conciliar? Is those old strong men between a pro-life Catholic and a social justice Catholic, perhaps? those tensions? Maybe something to think about. Dr. Nickerson?
Well, now that you mentioned that, I just wanted to point out that Dan Berrigan was a pro-life Catholic. He and his brother and Elizabeth McAllister, many of them were involved with the anti-abortion movement. That's not to say that they were activists like other anti-abortion activists in terms of their outlook and even the way they thought about life, but it really does beg the question of how much tension there was between those things for the Berrigans and others of their generation, and or perhaps that's a tension that's developed in more recent years.
Hmm. I mean, you're quite right about Dan doing direct action in front of abortion clinics and acting with the pro-life movement. And I think I never heard him. I can't recall hearing him use the seamless garment line, our sort of argument as such. But that's really, I mean, he was very consistent in commitment to nonviolence, and he saw abortion as another form of violence in the culture.
From what I understand, I think it was Elizabeth McAllister who elaborated more on her writing about abortion and life. But one of the interesting things I found out is I'm writing a book about the Candid 28, and Cookie Rodolphe, who is going to be here as part of these events, she was part of that action. She knew Dan and Phil. And in later years, he came to her, Dan, and asked her and other women if they would join with them in this fight against abortion. And my sense was that, well, she said no. She was a pro-life activist, and she was a feminist. And I wonder if, that was the time when there was something of not a rift, but people were just going in different directions.
Yeah, I can't say.
Thank you. We probably have time for maybe two more, so if you were sitting on the edge, this is good practice here, ramblers, to speak your mind and not feel too much pressure about it, but just enough pressure to speak your mind. As you listen to my honeyed baritone urge you along the path towards self-expression. Anybody on that side of the room want to say anything? Emily Kate's right there with the microphone. Another of our group want to speak their mind before we, don't be bashful, comment? All right, I think that's going to be it, so please let's put it together for Bill Wylie-Kellerman.